Hello friends, welcome to CEC Live Lectures. Dear friends, today we are going to talk on one of the important and interesting philosophies. Yes, we are going to talk on Indian philosophy only, and yes, we are going to talk on the philosophy only, and the philosophy which we are going to discuss today is John Dewey's philosophy of education. And for this discussion on the topic, we have with us in our studios Dr. Ajay Verma. Dr. Ajay Verma is Associate Professor in Center for Philosophy, School of Social Sciences, JNU. Dr. Verma has immense experience in the area of academics, and through his efforts and through his knowledge, we always get in-depth knowledge on various topics. We believe that from today's session also, we are going to touch the different aspects. Friends, let's welcome our guest, Dr. Ajay Verma, and let's try to understand John Dewey's philosophy of education. Hello, sir.
Thank you, Gitika. Hello viewers, so as Gitika told you, today we are going to talk about John Dewey's philosophy of education. Before we start talking about Dewey's philosophy of education, we must first try and understand what his views were generally on different philosophical themes. So as we know, one of the dominant areas of philosophy is epistemology, which pertains to definition and nature of knowledge, and so definition of knowledge is generally considered as justified true belief. So John Dewey also is considered one of the main philosophers who belonged to what was considered as a pragmatic school of philosophy. So before we discuss Dewey's philosophy of education, it'll be good for us to understand first what his ideas generally were regarding some of the other issues like epistemology and so on. So even before we begin doing that, let's also remember that John Dewey's lifespan was from 1859, the year when he was born, until 1952 when he died. So now, as we can see, this was a very crucial period. He lived over 80 years, and during his lifespan, there were several very important events that had taken place, and these were also some of the events which changed the course of thinking in different disciplines of knowledge. So, as we know, the later half of 19th century was many countries on the globe were still under colonial rule. But at the same time, if we try to look at the kind of things that were happening as far as the growth of knowledge development is concerned, we would remember that after Enlightenment there was a very fast growth, in different areas, especially, because our paradigm of how to think about, how to think about things around us, and how to consider knowledge itself, what should count as a valid source of knowledge. Our answers to these different questions were fast changing, and had already seen a kind of a revolution after Enlightenment. So, as we would remember, there was a rapid growth of scientific temperament, and scientific method was the dominant, method of the time, whereby the idea over there was that we don't need any kind of traditional sources of knowledge. We don't need to think of any particular scriptures as the final sources of knowledge, and as Francis Bacon said, that we can directly interact with nature. All we need to do is observe the nature around us, look for certain kind of patterns, uniformities, and nature. We can directly speak with nature, and when we follow this pursuit with a certain degree of perseverance, then answers start coming forth to us. So there was an emphasis, therefore, on some kind of direct observation, of things around us, direct observation of nature, and then look for answers. So, but at the same time, two of the dominant ways of looking at things as far as philosophy is concerned was rationalism and empiricism. And as you would remember, Descartes, who is famously considered the father of modern philosophy, he looked at experience as something that was fallible. Experience, according to him, was something that's fleeting, and since he was what he was looking for, his search was basically for solid foundations, indubitable foundations of knowledge. So therefore, he thought of experience as not a good candidate, to provide us such kind of foundation. So he was so to speak, very skeptical about human experience as providing some kind of foundational basis to our knowledge pursuit. And at the same time. Experience, human experience, as we understand, as Hume told us in sort of no unequivocal terms, that human experience is always fleeting, and the kind of certain uniformities that we suppose in our judgments, that is nowhere to be found in human experience. So human experience, because of its fleeting nature, because of its changing nature, was always discarded as a kind of good candidate for providing foundational basis to our knowledge edifice. And also at the same time, let's remember that philosophers, by and large, have been always looking for some kind of sort of rock solid foundations of knowledge. They're looking for definite structures, uniformities, and so on. So changes, fleetingness of something, that is not something that would be something to celebrate as far as philosophy as a discipline is concerned. So accordingly, if we also look at some of the dominant theories of truth, around that time, we find that there were mainly three: correspondence theory of truth, coherence theory of truth, and pragmatic theory of truth. We know that basically what we understand by correspondence theory of truth is that our judgments are true insofar as they truly reflect the actual state of affairs around us, as far as they conform to the facts. So far as they correspond to the facts, roughly speaking. And coherence is the idea in coherence theory of truth is that there is already an established body of knowledge, and there is the foremost requirement in a given body of knowledge is that there should be some kind of internal coherence within a particular body of knowledge, and that coherence is what ultimately decides the truth of the matter. If there is a statement which doesn't really fit into some of the already established truth, then probably we may not want to consider it as a good candidate, to be verified, as something as true. So, but pragmatism is something which has been for long wrongly understood, and in pragmatism, which has Dewey was certainly not the starting point of pragmatism. He had some important names preceding him, including William James. and C.S. Peirce, who had expressed ideas which now are called which are now put under pragmatic theory of truth. But the basic idea here was that knowledge, should have some kind of a direct connection with the way we experience our human condition. So experience here is not considered as some kind of entity and some kind of data under examination, where we are looking for certain indubitable structures, some kind of foundation for knowledge. Here the idea is that human experience arises already as our negotiation, as a result of our different kind of engagements with our surroundings. And so far as any proposition, any statement adds to in whatever way it simplifies this experience for us, in any way it makes this experience meaningful for us and addresses the human predicaments that are associated with those kind of experiences. So far as any statement, proposition addresses such issues, it should be considered as true, or it should be considered as a good candidate for knowledge. So, John Dewey was one of the main supporters of this view of truth and knowledge. Now, having said that, let's look at the amount of work that was produced by John Dewey. His one of his early works, titled Psychology, comes in 1887, and he sort of kept writing all through his career, and one of his later works, one of his last works was Knowing and the Known, with Arthur Bentley, which was in 1948. So we can see here that he kept writing for a little over 60 years. So he had a very sort of in terms of the work produced, he was active for more than 60 years, which is a very, very long time, and he left a lot of literature behind him, touching upon different aspects of philosophy, different aspects of education, and so on. But in today's lecture, our main focus would be on his philosophy of education. And I would try and read different passages from different sources, and we will try to elaborate upon that, and this is how we'll make an attempt to understand John Dewey's philosophy of education. And most of the slides that I'm going to read, their sources, Encyclopedia Britannica and Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, but majority of the slides are from E. Pathshala, from module on John Dewey, within the purview of philosophy of education under philosophy. So let's begin with reading the first passage. So before we try and understand what John Dewey's suggestions were regarding education, let's first try and understand what he thought was lacking in the philosophical ideas of his time. So, in order to develop and articulate his philosophical system, Dewey first needed to expose what he regarded as the flaws of the existing tradition. He believed that the distinguishing feature of Western philosophy was its assumption that true being, that which is fully real or fully knowable, is changeless, perfect, and eternal, and the source of whatever reality the world of experience may possess. Plato's forms, which were abstract entities corresponding to the properties of particular things, and the Christian conception of God were two examples of such a static, pure and transcendent being, compared with which anything that undergoes change is imperfect and less real. So as we can see here, so his main point of criticism here is that as philosophers, for some reason, we have been obsessed with something that's fully real, fully knowable, something that's changeless, perfect, eternal, and pure, so to speak, quote unquote. So these are, this is the kind of pursuit of knowledge that we have had for a long time as philosophers. And in this line, we see that some of the earliest philosophers, like Plato's, they think of some kind of forms which are abstract entities, which don't seem to have much to do with our sort of several human predicaments. It doesn't seem to have much to do with our, so to speak, our existential experience, which is rooted in here and now of things. Similarly, if you look at religion, there again some kind of definite answers, and we think that some of the scriptures that are some of the core texts that a particular religion holds to be sacrosanct. So we think that some kind of static, pure, transcendent being, ideas regarding such kind of static, pure, and transcendent being is to be found there, and we think of it as true. But we have been always pushing towards the periphery. Anything that undergoes change, looks imperfect, and therefore is less real. So Dewey thinks that our pursuit of knowledge has always been in the wrong direction, because human experience should be taken already as a result of our engagement with the world. It should be considered as a starting point. The way it actually is, its fleetingness, along with this fleetingness, along with this change, along with this so-called imperfection, and so on. So that should be considered as the very starting point of philosophy. So now, carrying on with the passage, according to one modern version of the assumption developed by the 17th century philosopher René Descartes, all experience is subjective, an exclusive mental phenomenon that cannot provide evidence of the existence or the nature of the physical world, the matter of which is ultimately nothing more than changeless extension in motion. The Western tradition thus made a radical distinction between true reality on the one hand and the endless varieties and variations of worldly human experience on the other. So basically, this is carrying on the same kind of criticism regarding the way we followed our pursuit of knowledge within philosophy at that time. So our search was always something which we could think of as true reality, but vis-a-vis that, our endless variety and variations of worldly human experience looked feeble and looked not good candidates for our philosophical pursuit, so to speak. Now, carrying on with the same discussion, Dewey held that this philosophy of nature was drastically impoverished. Rejecting any dualism between being and experience, he proposed that all things are subject to change and do change. There is no static being and there is no changeless nature, nor is experience purely subjective, because the human mind is itself part and parcel of nature. Human experiences are the outcomes of a range of interacting processes and are thus worldly events. The challenge to human life, therefore, is to determine how to live well and processes of change, not somehow to transcend them. So as we can see, this passage is also somehow reminiscent of Socrates as a philosopher, as we would remember that earlier than him. The main search of pre-Socratic philosophers was for some kind of stuff that everything is made of. So their search was was for some kind of stuff that would explain away the fleetingness, the changes that we see around us, the way sort of things seem to undergo change. Underlying those changes, as philosophers, we were looking for something that stays and abides through different events in time, and this is what our search was for. So, but there, there was not much thought given to, our sort of issues, our existential issues, our the way we were negotiating as human beings with our environment, the kind of, problems that we were having, that were embedded in our existential experience of that time. Questions, concerning right and wrong, justice, good life, those were not of much concern to us, because even if we know what is the ultimate stuff of the universe, it doesn't give us, an answer to, the problems that arise out of our engagement with the world, that arise of, our peculiar predicament within our human condition. So that way, so similar kind of a turn is something that Dewey wants to give the philosophy of his time, and he time and again puts emphasis upon the human experience, which are, as he points out, outcomes of a range of interacting processes and are thus worldly events. So human experience is also one of the worldly events, one of the facts that we find around us, and that should be the actual starting point. That should be the main point of concern, according to Dewey, for any philosopher. So, as a matter of fact, in one of his works, he points out that earlier most of the solutions to our problems, were learnt within given setup at home. So, in olden times, we would know that most of our daily needs were fulfilled from within the family itself. So, for milk, we would have sort of cattle. We would rear cattle in the family. For warm clothes, we would have sheep. Like many a times, we would also sort of weave our clothes at home. So learning concerned of our immediate needs, our immediate requirements, which arose out of our negotiation with the environment, and most of these issues were addressed within the family setup by learning how to do things. So learning basically at that time meant learning to do things. So that meant learning by doing, and that's the kind of learning that Dewey puts emphasis upon. So and now when it comes to his philosophical ideas, as opposed to rationalism and empiricism, Dewey had developed pragmatic theory of truth, according to which epistemology should rather focus on what kind of knowledge formation and learning is better suited for expediting our immediate life needs and engagements, and also the distant goals that we have projected for ourselves. According to Dewey, the philosophical enterprise of comparing our knowledge edifice with the external reality is an endless project, because there is no way of arriving at some commensurability principle on the basis of which we could decide true from false. There is no ultimate indisputable way of finding out whether world appears to us in certain way because we are so and so, or world is so and so, and that is the sole reason for it to appear so and so, for it to appear before us as so and so. So, as we can see here, Dewey was, critical of empiricism and rationalism both, and regarding, sort of correspondence theory of truth, where we judge the truth of our experiences vis-a-vis how well they conform to so-called the facts of the world. Dewey finds out, Dewey sort of points out that there is always this gap, some kind of unbridgeable gap, and sort of to commensurate to commensurate our human experiences with the facts of the world, some kind of commensurability principle on the basis of which we could look for some kind of a congruence, conformity between the two, and that principle could never be discovered. So these were some of his main criticisms regarding the dominant sort of methods of doing philosophy around his time. So viewers, we'll continue our discussion on John Dewey's philosophy of education. We'll take a short break here. We'll return in a few minutes. Thank you.
With this note, thank you, sir. Thank you so very much for giving us this session on John Dewey's philosophy of education. Friends, we will be back after a short break and we'll be discussing more, so be with us. Thank you. Hello friends, welcome back to this session. Friends, as you know that today we are talking on John Dewey's philosophy of education, and for the discussion on the topic we have with us in our studios Dr. Ajay Verma. Dr. Ajay Verma is Associate Professor in Center for Philosophy, School of Social Sciences, JNU. So let's welcome our guest Dr. Verma once again, and let's try to get more knowledge on the topic. Hello sir, welcome to the lecture.
Welcome back. So as we were discussing Dewey's account of philosophy of education, so we saw how he was critical of sort of main ways of doing philosophy around his time, which basically one of the main ways of looking at these dominant ways was rationalism and empiricism. So, as opposed to that, Dewey tries to propound a different way of looking at things, where we focus on human experience as given, and that should be our starting point. And that shouldn't at the same time mean that some kind of phenomenological examination of our human experience. Rather, what he was propounding was that we should take human experience as its as at its face value. We should examine how what kind of human predicament is it a result of, and we should focus on how as human subjects we negotiate in practical ways with our surroundings, and this should also reflect in the way we try to sort of educate others. So now sort of along the same line, let's read some more passages. So, on Dewey's account, we should much better focus on how ideas arising from our concrete engagement with the world and our needs from it are instrumental for us in schematizing and edifying our previously accumulated experiences, which in turn help us to develop a more practical anticipation towards our future goals. We can achieve this by proposing models based on our past experiences and evaluating the outcomes in comparison with our expectation, and consequently continuing to work to improve them even further. This, according to Dewey, should be conceived as the true goal of education. So the idea here is that in the past, as we grow from childhood to adolescent and to old age, we always carry with us a can of some kind of accumulated experience, things that we have learned from the past. And with that kind of kind of experience, with that kind of accumulated experience, we negotiate with our present situations, and we learn by negotiating in different ways with our present situations, and and which also comprises of failures, successes of different kinds, which in turn add to our already existent can of experiences. So any education which does not take into account this kind of a dynamic process that is involved, the dynamicity of human experiences as we learn through it. Any philosophy of education which ignores this part, according to John Dewey, would not be an appropriate, a good philosophy of education on his view. So, Dewey pointed out that the fundamental flaw in the practice of education as offered in schools is that it is based on a monological, one-way authoritarian approach towards learning. As such, schools put premium upon inculcating passive, uncritical following of rules, often elicited by the schools as an institution by coercion and threats of exclusion, not only from educational institutions but consequently from information-based job market as well. So, John Dewey, pointed out some of the flaws that exist in the practice of education at that time, and what he pointed out was that most of the time in schools, the approach that we follow is what he terms as authoritarian approach. So school curriculum considers something as already established body of truth, which needs to be in a certain way impressed upon the children who are there for learning. And so the basic idea is some kind of already existent body of truth, and impressing it upon the learners such that when the students go out into the job market, they have a strong information base. They have they have impressed upon their mind all the entire, so to speak, the body of knowledge, which is sort of considered true on authority. So, and that, according to Dewey, is a kind of a monological, authoritarian way, which he didn't quite agree with. So, as opposed to this, schools, according to Dewey, should appeal to and inculcate the virtues of cooperation, knowledge exchange, and dialogue, towards which learners often have a native, natural tendency. This could further result in an unforced, gradual, self-propelled development of acceptance of mutually agreed upon democratic rules at a later stage. So, the idea here is that instead of this kind of monological feeding of certain body of truth, impressing it upon the learners, we should make the sort of our educational process more dynamic, because if we look at the way we have evolved as a society, the way we have evolved as a species, actually, according to some thinkers, it became possible. We grew sort of very fast. We developed very fast as human beings, mainly because we sort of knew how to live in a collectivity, and we formed societies where the demands and needs of everybody was taken care of. So living in a collectivity, living as a social group, requires inculcation of certain values, and to truly internalize those values, we must understand our predicaments within the society, our social predicaments, and a good understanding would be of that would be based on our interactions with others. So this is a kind of a native, natural tendency in us, because this is how we have grown up as a species, and at any given point we are sort of mainly social beings. So instead of feeding off some of the ethical values or democratic rules, actually a society, in a certain way, the model of society, the structure of society as it exists, should be extended to the classroom environment, such that the classroom should itself exemplify the social the social sort of social structures, social predicaments, and so on and so forth, such that the values that we would require later on, the kind of democratic values that we would require later on, when we step out in society as adult human beings, are already inculcated in us through actual experience, through our actual interactions. So education, according to him, should be based on group activities where we perform certain things. We have some goal-oriented activities. We have a kind of a problem before us as a group. We try to sort of have discussions around it, try to unanimously sort of come up with a decision to tackle, like how to tackle a particular problem at hand. And these are, and that would inculcate in us certain values regarding how to conduct ourselves, how to operate in a group. So if these values are imbibed from outside, if these are sort of impressed upon us in a monological way, then these are not going to stay with us for very long. But if they are sort of learnt by doing, then they become internalized in us, and then they get internalized into our accumulated experience. And once this process happens through this dynamic activity of problem solving as a group, and so on. Once that happens, then these values, these democratic values, become a part of us, such that we don't need to actually remember those values. We don't need to have, we don't need to recall, these values, on paper for that matter, and so on. So this is, the kind of idea regarding education that Dewey was propounding. So learning on this model of Dewey's, would hinge upon an appeal to a learner's desire to engage in practice of learning, and to motivate acceptance of democratic practices that make it possible. If children have a desire to play a game, they would naturally follow the rules of the game without requiring any external regulation or control. On the same line, schools should motivate learners to participate in activities that require teamwork and mutual cooperation, through which children learn to work together and accept rules voluntarily, which are framed by themselves while participating in those activities. Dewey points out that superficial order that is manifest in any school setup anywhere in the world is symptomatic of deep unrest within the psyche of the learner. So, here the idea is, if we look at, the way children grow up, we would remember that, they make up their own kinds of games, and, they don't really need to learn, so to speak, the rules of this game from outside, because those are mutually agreed upon rules in the first place. And like in games, children assign different roles to themselves, and try to reach towards certain temporary goals that they set for themselves. So according to Dewey, this should also be our approach in life. These are also the skills that we primarily require as social beings. So out there in the society, if we inculcate the same kind of values, if we follow the same kind of mechanism where we come together and discuss several issues like environmental issues and so on, by end come up unanimously with certain decisions, and then follow them, and that this is what we require to do, and this is something that we should learn by doing, just like children learn several things by creating some kind of different kind of games for themselves, which are very important part of learning, as opposed to some kind of superficial order that we find manifest in a school setup. According to Dewey, this order, this pattern, this superficial order, is only only has an apparent kind of reality. It's not real in the true sense of the term, because behind this ordering of things is some kind of a coercion, some kind of maintenance of discipline, so to speak, that is externally exercised by the school, and the net result of that is that it creates some kind of unrest within the psyche of the learner, which over the years only increases. And according to Dewey, this is something that should be avoided at all costs. So instead, the emphasis should be on mutual cooperation and learning by doing things together. That should be the idea, because this is what we would require when we go out of school and become the members, the full grown adult members of the society. So Dewey points out that learning by doing should make the school a place abuzz with activities. Any place of activity where something meaningful is being constructed never looks ordered and structured like classrooms and prayer assemblies of schools do. Giving the analogy of a construction site, Dewey points out that a construction site looks absolutely disordered and in disarray on the surface, but the entire activity, once understood, is in sync with the ultimate idea of the building that everybody engaged in the construction is working towards. So, as a matter of fact, this also sort of reminds us of certain anecdote that Dewey mentions in one of his works, where he points out that we know that Dewey also, during his career, started what was called a laboratory school, where he experimented with some of the ideas of regarding education that we had. And in that anecdote he points out that he thought of a very different he thought that this laboratory school would require a very different kind of furniture, furniture very different from that you generally find in a school setup, where you find these desks which are sort of arranged in columns. So he goes to a furniture shop and asks for a particular type of furniture, and he tells the shop owner that he has this requirement for a school, and then the shop owner tells him that he has never supplied anything of this kind to the school, and he failed to understand why what that kind of furniture would be doing sitting in a school. So, but the idea that Dewey sort of points out there was that in his laboratory school, the idea would be to pose a problem before a group of students and leaving them with themselves, and then letting them solve the problem as a group. So it was going to be a kind of a group activity where children participate in an activity, and so it was ultimately was going to be some kind of a learning by doing. But so according to him, on this on this basis, if we follow this kind of philosophy of education, then a school would have a very different kind of a site, where you'll find different kind of activities taking place in different nooks and corners of the school, where there would be no more columns of desks that you'll find in the class, where sort of teacher is simply uttering out from the book so-called this already established already established canon of truth, already established canon of knowledge. So, as opposed to that, school on this account should, be abuzz with activity. It should apparently look, as if things are in disarray. But as we saw here, that when we look at a construction site, from the outside it seems as if everything is kind of chaotic. But once we understand what's going on there, once we understand what is being done there, the goal of the activity, which is the construction of the building, within that context, we very soon discover that everything from that point of view, everything is in perfect order. So everybody, has assigned for himself a particular place and is working towards it on the basis of, whatever the best to do. So, according to Dewey, this is what a school should rather look like. He further writes, and I quote, "There is a little order of one sort where things are in process of construction. There is certain disorder in any busy workshop. There is no silence. Persons are not engaged in maintaining certain physical postures like we find in common classrooms. Their arms are not folded. They are not holding their books, thus and so. They are doing a variety of things. And there is the confusion, the bustle that results from activity. Out of the occupation and out of doing things that are to produce results, and out of doing these in social and cooperative way, there is born a discipline of its own kind and type. Our whole conception of school discipline changes when we get this point of view. In critical moments, we all realize that the only discipline that stands by us, the only training that becomes intuition, is that got through life itself. So as pointed out earlier, the main point here is that one needs to have a very different idea of what we call discipline. If we really internalize the role we have in a given environment, in a given situation, then we work through our intuitions, and we become we don't really need to follow the rules, quote unquote, because those rules are, so to speak, a part of our already accumulated knowledge by experience. It's already a part of our accumulated experience. So therefore, we don't need to externalize first, these rules and then take them upon ourselves. We don't need to really think about, oh, okay, this is what I learned in the school and now this is how I should act upon it. Things that you learn through activities become a part of your accumulated experience, and they, so to speak, get invoked and get activated as if whenever a particular kind of situation arises, and it becomes a part of your intuition that you start acting upon. So there is a certain kind of immediacy here. The moment you find yourself in a particular situation as a part of the group, and the moment you have an understanding of the entire situation, the goal towards which we are working, you sort of certain kind of behavior gets, so to speak, naturally activated from within you. So, precariousness, which is distinctive of human experience, and because of which, as we saw in the earlier part of our lecture, because of which human experience is considered as a feeble candidate for knowledge as we have been defining it for so long, in terms of its empiricist requirements, in terms of the requirements that were put upon it by the rationalists. So the precariousness of human experiences is taken as something positive by Dewey, and once we do that, a very different kind of very different kind of philosophical ideas regarding education come to the fore before us. So for Dewey, a precarious event is one that somehow makes ongoing experience problematic. Thus, any obstacle, disruption, danger, or surprise of any kind is precarious. As noted earlier, because humanity is a part of nature, all things that humans encounter in their daily experience, including other humans and the social institutions they inhabit, are natural events. So basically, the idea here is that precariousness of human experience is a result of our changing environment. But there is some kind of learning that is automatically happening all the time when we engage with our predicaments as group or as alone. And so in that context, precariousness is something that is productive of learning, that is conducive to the educational process, rather than something that should be shunned away, rather than something that should be viewed as something negative, something that we should try and do away by looking for some kind of rock solid foundations for our knowledge edifice, as was envisaged by Descartes and several other philosophers. So, the arbitrary cruelty of a tyrant or the kindness shown by a stranger is as natural and precarious as the destruction wrought by a flood or the vibrant colors of a sunset. Human ideas and moral norms, as Dewey points out, must also be viewed in this way. Human knowledge is wholly intertwined with precarious, constantly changing nature. So, as we discussed earlier, changing, nature, the fleeting nature of, reality around us is something that is conducive of learning, or viewed as something conducive of learning by Dewey, rather than something of a challenge that should be done away by discovering some kind of more static, structures within our mind or within our experiences, as was, something that the earlier philosophers were searching for, all empiricists and rationalists. So now, having learned this, how Dewey, who was also a kind of, in a certain way, was a product of his time, in the sense that, as we saw that he saw two world wars during his lifetime. He's born when science has started making huge leaps and bounds. Science has started progressing in huge leaps and bounds. When different knowledge pursuits have, in a certain way, gained some kind of independence from some kind of a traditional kind of learning, conservative notions of learning in the past, where the dominant idea was scientific method, where we study nature directly and try to look for uniformities in nature. So in that kind of during those times, Dewey discovers that philosophers were looking for some kind of static structures, some kind of truths, certainties. This is what we were looking for. But this is, not something that we can ever find, in our lived experience. Our lived experience progresses in a very different way, where these kind of static notions of truth don't seem to connect with our lived experience in any direct ways. So, as opposed to that kind of a search for knowledge, he presents a very different kind of a paradigm before us, whereas the precariousness, uncertainty, in human knowledge, should be taken as tools of learning, and the emphasis should be on how we practically negotiate individually and as a part of the group with our environment, and how we try and solve problems by this constant negotiation with our predicaments, with our situations, with our conditions. So we'll continue with our discussion on Dewey's conception of philosophy of education. That's it for today. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so very much for giving us this productive session. Dear friends, you are requested to write to us at info.cec@nic.in if you have any queries, or if you want to give your feedback. We will be meeting again very soon. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, sir. Thank you once again.